Welcome everyone to lesson number 1 of Decoding the Talmud. I'm very excited about this course, and we're gonna get right into it, trying to understand what is the Talmud all about. And some of you, everyone will be coming with a different understanding, their own background of what the Talmud is. But in this course, we're going to be touching on many different parts of the Talmud. The history of the Talmud. We're going to be talking about the contents of the Talmud. We're going to also experience some of the texts of the Talmud. We're going to understand some of the methodology of the Talmud. And we're also going to have some mystical teachings, what the Talmud means on a mystical level, as well as some key terms. And everyone has in front of them a little pamphlet of key terms. We're going to go through that little pamphlet throughout this course. Any key term that says 1 on the front in the beginning of it is for tonight's lesson number 1. Any key term that says 2 or 3 will be for lesson 2 and 3 respectively. So you could keep that handy with you, stick it in your book or something. So we're gonna get right into it. What's going on? Oh, it's okay. They're all in your book as well. They're all in your book as well. So they should be a little bigger in your book. There was once a man, a boy, young boy, who came to the rabbi and he said, "Rabbi, I want to study the Talmud. I think I'm ready. I've achieved a certain amount of Jewish knowledge. I'm ready for the Talmud." And the rabbi says, "So I'm sorry, but you're not ready for the Talmud." He says, "No, Rabbi, I'm telling you, I'm ready for the Talmud." So the rabbi said, "Okay, we'll do the test. We'll do the test and see if you pass." So the boy says, "Sure, I'm ready. What's the test?" So the rabbi says as follows: 2 people climbed down a chimney. One person's face is dirty and one person's face is clean. Who washes their face? So the boy thinks for a moment and he says, "Well, obviously the guy whose face is dirty washes his face." So the rabbi says, "See, I told you, you're not ready for the Talmud. The guy whose face is dirty looks over at the guy whose face is clean, and he assumes that his face is clean because he sees that his face is clean, so he doesn't wash his face. And the opposite is also true. The guy whose face is clean looks at the guy whose face is dirty, and he assumes that his face is also dirty, so he washes his face, even though his face is really clean." The guy says, "Now I get it." Someone's sitting there. Just move over 1. Sorry. There we go. Yeah, she's just in the bathroom. So he says, "Now I get it." The rabbi says, "Go back, continue learning, and maybe next time." A week later, the boy comes back and says, "Rabbi, I'm ready for the Talmud." The rabbi says, "Okay, let's see if you can answer the question. 2 people climb down a chimney. One guy's face is dirty and one guy's face is clean. Who washes their face?" The boy thinks for a moment. He says, "It's simple, Rabbi. The guy whose face is dirty looks over at the guy whose face is clean, and he assumes that his face is also clean, so he doesn't wash his face. The guy whose face is clean looks over at the guy whose face is dirty, and he assumes that his face is also dirty, so he washes his face." The rabbi says, "See, you're not ready for the Talmud. That's only if there's no mirror. But if there's a mirror, then the guy whose face is dirty will look in the mirror and he'll see his own face is dirty, so he'll wash his face. And the guy whose face is clean will look in the mirror and see his face is clean." The guy says, "Okay, now I understand." Comes back a week later. He says, "Rabbi, now I'm ready for the Talmud." So the rabbi says, "Okay, let me see if you can answer the question. 2 people climb down a chimney. One guy's face is dirty and one guy's face is clean. Who washes their face?" The guy says, "Rabbi, I got it. If there's a mirror, then the guy whose face is clean looks in the mirror, sees his face is clean, he doesn't wash his face because he sees his face is clean. The guy whose face is dirty looks in the mirror, sees his face is dirty, so he washes his face. If there's no mirror, then the guy whose face is dirty looks over the guy whose face is clean, he assumes his face is also clean, so he doesn't wash his face. The guy whose face is clean looks over the guy whose face is dirty, and he assumes his face is also dirty, so he washes his face." Rabbi says, You don't get it. You don't get it. How could it be 2 people climb down a chimney and one guy's face is dirty and one guy's face is clean? It doesn't make any sense. You're not ready for the Talmud. The Talmud, which we're going to discuss in this course, is very, very analytical, and we're going to discuss exactly why and how it came to be. So let's get right into it. But first, we're going to start off with a very fascinating story that we'll watch the video for this.
March 3rd, 1240, was a Shabbat. But for the harassed Jews of medieval France, numbering as many as 100,000 souls, it was not to be a day of rest, but of unprecedented unrest. They were praying in their synagogues when the raid began. In cities and towns throughout the kingdom, agents of King Louis IX of France burst through the doors of Jewish houses of prayer and seized thousands of hapless prisoners. All the detainees were transported to Paris, where they were held in convents under strict guard to await their trial on accusations of grave crimes. For 3 long months, they languished in captivity until their collective trial began. Meanwhile, the Jews of the kingdom gathered continuously to storm the heavens on their behalf with fasting and prayer. 4 of the greatest luminaries of the French Jewish community, led by the highly respected Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, served as the prisoners' legal defense. Following the trial, the judges continued to debate the case for another 2 years, while European Jewry held its breath. Finally, in June of 1242, 24 wagons and tightly packed convicts rolled into Place de Grève, causing the Jews of France to emit a collective groan of horror. Place de Grève was a public square along the banks of the Seine River, notorious as the historic site of public executions, hangings, beheadings, and burnings at the stake. Throngs of Parisians lined the streets to enjoy the spectacle, while those of the Jewish faith remained hidden, terrified to venture from their homes. The prisoners had been found guilty and had been sentenced to extermination through public burning. The evil verdict was carried out with glee. But as they were consigned to the flames, there were no cries of agony or despair, nor was there a smell of burning flesh, because the prisoners were not people. They were books, thousands upon thousands of handwritten scrolls and codices, every copy of the Talmud that the king's agents could find in France, almost all of which had been sheltered in the nation's synagogues, had been arrested, put on trial, and condemned to public burning. The Jewish tradition was consigned to the fire that day, and as angry flames roared at their ancient wisdom, as their teachings rose as ash, and an inferno ingested their spiritual treasures, the Jewish communities of France were singed with grief and flung into mourning for their executed pages, for their martyred beliefs.
So, in the story, if you caught the plot twist there, they didn't take people to prison. They took books, and they put the books, which was the Talmud, on trial, and they were trying to figure out what they should do about this horrible book called the Talmud. And they decided they're going to burn it. And I want to point out that in those days, they didn't have printing presses where books were just something everyone had on their shelf. When you say a book, I mean a handwritten scroll. And this is something that was very, very valuable. In Jewish schools, they would teach these kids, and sometimes they would have 24 kids around the table studying over 1, maybe 2 books of the Talmud. And that was considered like the norm. So when they came in and they burned these books, it was the most incredible blow to the Jewish people to try and get rid of our tradition. Because the Talmud is not just a book that we read. The the Talmud is our Jewish tradition. It touches every part of Jewish life. When studying the Talmud in yeshiva, really it kind of becomes its own little culture. There's a tune for the reading of the Talmud. There's even like hand gestures for the reading of the Talmud. It becomes the book becomes alive, and it took the Jewish people throughout the ages and kept us alive. They say a cute story about the tune of the Talmud. There was once a man. His name was Avram, and Avram comes to the rabbi. He says, "Rabbi, Beryl called me a thief, a ganef. He called me a thief, and he's ruining my reputation." So the rabbi calls Beryl in. He says, "You called him a thief?" He said, "Yeah, whatever, not a big deal." So the rabbi said, "Listen, now you got to get up in front of the entire shul. You got to get up in front of the entire community and tell everyone Avram is not a thief." So Beryl says, "Sure, I'll do that, no problem." So the next week, Shabbos, by the Kiddush, he gets up, he bangs on the table, he says, "Everyone, I just want you to know, Avram is not a thief." Get it? In other words, so the tune that you use for something makes a big difference. Saying it, Avram is not a thief, is one thing. Saying Avram is not a thief sounds like you don't really mean what you say. But either way, the point is that the tune of the Talmud became very, very important. Well, let's read text number 3. If you open up your books, your student book to page number 6, text number 3. Sorry, we skipped a few texts, but you can read them in your own time. I'm gonna read it so you could follow along with me. The text number 3, Home in a Book. This is from Cecil Roth. He writes as follows: "The importance in Jewish life of the Talmud is not by any means purely academic. It comprises the accumulated wisdom of the Jewish people over many generations. The period of its redaction coincided with the growth of independent centers of life in far distant regions, cut off politically and linguistically from the former nuclei. The Jewish people was about to enter on an entirely different phase of its being, in countries of which their fathers had never heard, in the face of difficulties, whatever that word says, hitherto unimaginable, but they possessed to bring with them into their new existence a code, not merely a religion or of law, but of civilization. The Talmud gave the Jew a fatherland, which he could carry about with him when his own land was lost. And if he was able to maintain his identity in the course of the long centuries to come, under conditions such as no other people has ever been able to surmount, it is with the Talmud above all that the credit lies." And so this author is describing how the Talmud is really what kept the Jewish people alive throughout the ages. So we have to ask the question, what is the Talmud? And why is it so important? Why do we study it so much? And why is it that it kept the Jewish nation alive throughout the years? So I want to give a little overview of what we're going to talk about in this course so we could get into it. So in today's lesson, we're going to discuss how the Talmud is mostly about law. And we're going to discuss where exactly does that law come from, and why the study of law is so important. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. In lesson number 2, we're going to talk about the Mishnah. Anyone ever heard of the Mishnah? A few people. So the Mishnah, we're going to talk about next week. All about how it came to be, how it was composed, and what specialty the words of the Mishnah have. Now, lesson number 3, 4, and 5 are all going to be about the Gemara. Anyone ever heard of the word Gemara? Less people. A few people. You still got some hands. So the Gemara is all about the analytical explanation to the Mishnah, which we'll talk about lesson 3, 4, and 5. The Gemara is compiled with teachings from many, many sages called Amoram. We'll talk about that more then. Lesson number 6, we're going to be talking about how the Talmud actually continues to be studied, and we continue to add to the body of Talmudic scholarship till today, which is that's for lesson 6. So we're gonna start on page. We're gonna continue. On page 7, and we're gonna page 8. I apologize. Page 8. We're gonna ask the question: what is the Talmud? So let's start with 10 facts on the Talmud. So we'll do this. We'll go around the room. Everyone will say one fact. We'll start with this side this time. Raphael, can you start page 8, figure 1.1? Read fact number 1 about the Talmud.
The Talmud is a combination of 2 books, the Mishnah and the Gemara, with the latter style as a contemporary elaboration and analysis of the form.
Yeah, commentary. Yeah, so that's fact number 1. Yeah, no problem. No, fact number 2. Leah? Want to read number 2?
The Mishnah was composed around 200 CE in Northern Israel.
There we go. Fact number 3. Les, take it away.
There are 2 versions of the Gemara. The first is the Jerusalem Talmud, and the second is the Babylonian Talmud.
Yeah, so the Jerusalem Talmud is called Talmud Yerushalmi, which means Jerusalem Talmud, and the second one is called Talmud Bavli, which means the Babylonian Talmud. Fact number 4. Scott, take it away.
The Jerusalem Talmud was completed in the 4th century in northern Israel. The Babylonian Talmud was completed in the 5th century in Babylonia, located in the region of modern day Iraq.
Yeah, Bavel is the word in Hebrew for Babylonia. That's what we call it. Number 5, Rachel.
The Mishnah compiles the teachings of approximately 120 sages, referred to as the Tanaim.
Yeah, Tanaim are the sages that are quoted in the Mishnah. Number 6.
The Gemara compiles the teachings of approximately 800 sages, referred to as the Amoraim.
Amoraim, yeah, Amoraim are the sages in the Gemara. Number 7.
Talmud is divided into 63 sections or books referred to as Meshiot.
Mesechtot, yeah. Tractates. So you got 2 hard words. Mesechtot is the Hebrew word. Tractates is the English word, although that doesn't help anyone. So actually, I have a set of my Talmud right over here. This is actually not even the whole thing, but this is just the introduction. Whoops. Right here. Here we go. This is part of the Mesechta Brachot, which means blessings, tractate Brachot. And this is just book number 1 of 3 for the tractate of Brachot. So a tractate could have more than 1 book, depending on the print, or how big the letters are, or how many English explanations they put inside. But the idea is that we call it a tractate to not get confused, with an actual book on the shelf. Anyway, what are you up to now? Number 8, Mark.
Every tractate contains teachings of the Mishnah, but not every tractate features the teachings of the Gemara. Some tractates are treated in the Babylonian Talmud, some in the Jerusalem Talmud.
Yeah, some in both.
Some in both, and some in neither.
Yeah. So you understand every single tractate has to have Mishnah, because or else it's not a tractate. The Gemara, which is a commentary to the Mishnah, is not necessarily on every tractate. Some of them have only in the Babylonian Talmud a Gemara, some only the Jerusalem Talmud, some in both, some in neither, but you got to have at least a Mishnah. Number 9.
The Universal Standard Print of
Okay, let's just finish.
Talmud in the 19th century, Vilna Shas, which includes several primary commentaries and fills 2,711 double-edged pages.
Double-sided pages, yeah.
Folios.
Folio is a fancy word for a page, but just that means both sides. What was that?
So what is the Mishnah?
We'll talk about it next week. We're talking all about the Mishnah next week. Right now, tonight's really the introduction to the whole Talmud. So that way we can understand what's going to happen next week. Not going to be lost, or else you'll have more questions. So I just want to point out that everyone has in front of them, well, you should at least, a little copy of, this is actually a page from the Talmud. This is what the Talmud looks like. This is what Sandy mentioned called the Vilna Shas. They printed the Shas, and the Shas is another word for Talmud. But they printed the Shas in Vilna, and that became the standard print for all future Talmud books, printings later on. So this is called the Vilna Shas print. And now it's just the standard print. But either way, I want you guys all to see that. And there's even some explanation of what all the different commentaries are on the side, but you'll have to do that at a different time. Number 10. Who's going to do that? Harriet, go ahead.
Talmudic citations in the English writing typically include 1, a tractate name, 2, a folio number, and 3, a letter indicating the folio side, A or B. For example, the citation, the Sachim 99b indicates that the passage cited the source in the tractate entitled Pesachim on the reverse side of the 99 folio. Unless otherwise specified, all such references refer to the heavily studied Babylonian Talmud, but not the Jerusalem Talmud, the study in which is more limited.
Yeah, so in other words, if I say Pesachim 99b, you'll have to open up a tractate Pesachim, and then you got to go to page 99, and then you got to go to side B of that page, but your page will look something like this. So you still have to know what you're looking for on this massive page of teachings, because this could take you 6 months to go through. I actually had a teacher who he used to study Talmud, and he did an in-depth learning, and it literally would take him 6 months to go through a half of a page, one side of one page. There's definitely a lot of knowledge in each one of these pages, especially if you want to get an in-depth understanding of it. Either way, Mike, we're going to continue with you in just a minute, but you got to hold up. So
I lucked out and didn't get the long section.
yeah. So we want to add one key term before we continue. Tonight's lesson is the word, and this is on page 9 in your book, or it's also on your key term page. This is key term 1.1. It's called halacha. Halacha is literally translated as a way or a path, like the word halicha or holech in Hebrew means to go. But what it means is, the word halacha means Jewish law. That's what it means. So if I say I'm studying halacha, it means I'm studying Jewish law. The Talmud is mainly a book on halacha, studying the study of Jewish law. That's what it is. So the best way to really get into and understand what the Talmud is, we have to really pull out a book and start reading it. But because we don't all have our own books, we took little pieces from the Talmud, little samples, and we have them on our page 9 in our book. And we'll continue the rounds, and we're going to read, starting with Mike. You're going to read little text 4a. This is a quote, a little sample from Talmud Pesachim 99b. That's actually the example Harriet gave a second ago. Pesachim 99b. So if you're wondering what she was referring to, this is the quote from the Talmud. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, time for matzah. Arvei.
No, do the English. Do the English. We don't know Hebrew here.
On the eve of Pesach, we may not eat from close to the time of mincha until it is dark, to ensure a healthy appetite for eating matzah at the Passover Seder later that night.
Here we go. So let me ask you a question, Mike. Let me ask you a question. Do you understand that sentence? That makes sense to you?
A little bit.
A little bit?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
What's the question?
When's mincha?
When is mincha? There we go. That's a great question. Any other questions?
Yeah, what do you consider dark?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but he's.
Yeah.
What's considered
How
dark?
do you define these things dark?
Okay.
Yeah.
I have another question.
Farm Seder or a Chabad Seder?
There you go. Well, we're trying to decipher this sentence. We're trying to decipher the sentence right here. It says, do not eat close to the time of mincha. So Mike said, when's mincha? I have another question. When's close to the time of mincha? What does that mean? Just say from the time of mincha. What's close to the time of mincha? I have another question. It says don't eat. What's considered eating? Can I have an apple? Can I take a drink of water? Do I have to fast like Yom Kippur? What's going on? What does it mean? Another question. Does it apply to any other days besides for the night of this Passover Seder? The reason is, the logic is because I want to have a hearty appetite to be able to eat the Seder. What if I'm doing a Friday night dinner? Should I have an appetite to eat my Friday night dinner? My Shabbat dinner? Do I need to also fast on Friday afternoon? What does it mean? And this is exactly what the Talmud discusses. The Talmud will quote a simple line from a Mishnah or a statement that is taught in the oral law. We'll get to more about that in a minute. But they'll quote a statement, and then the Talmud will sit sometimes for pages trying to understand what exactly that line meant. But let's continue. This is just a sample.
That's why we have so many Jewish lawyers.
That's exactly why we have so many Jewish lawyers. Yes, exactly. Text. We'll continue to text 4b. Charla, you'll read this one.
Right. If one hires skilled workers and they deceive each other, they have only a right to complain, but not to pursue a financial claim.
A lot of questions about that. What's considered skilled workers? What good is it to complain? You know the joke. There was a guy in Russia, in communist Russia. He wanted to get a visa to go to Israel, and so he applies, and the KGB come knocking on his door, and they said, "What's going on? You don't like Russia?" He's like, "No, I can't complain." So he said, "What? You don't like the food? I can't complain." So he says, "What is it? You don't like your house?" He says, "No, I can't complain." So he says, "So why do you want to leave?" He says, "Because there I can complain." So what good is it to? What the question is, when the Talmud says you have the right to complain, you only have the right to complain. What is only the right to complain? What does that mean? What good is that? Text 4c, another sample on the Talmud in Yuma. John, you got this one?
Immersion times. All who are obligated to ritually immerse must be so during the day, with the exception of a woman who is a nida or a
Yoledet.
Post-menstruation or post-birth, who must ritually immerse at night.
So here, very simply put, anytime someone goes to the mikvah, they go during the day. Besides for two exceptions, a woman who just gave birth or a woman who is a nida. Otherwise, that's the only exception. They go at night. But otherwise, they go during the day. And again, the Talmud has a lot to discuss about that. What exactly does that line fully mean? And that's exactly what the Talmud talks about. Last text that we're going to do, last sample. For now, this is on page 10, text 4d. Amir, you want to read this one?
Go ahead, I don't have a book.
Oh, you don't have? Oh, here we go. Sorry. Your book is in the mail. I ordered it today. Page 10.
All right, a place for everyone. Every Jewish individual has a share in the world to come. As it is stated, your people are all righteous. They will inherit the land forever. They are the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, in which I take pride.
So if you notice, 3 out of the 4 quotes that we just quoted from the Talmud are very much law-based. When you're allowed to do this, when do you do that, how do you do it, what do you do? The last one was more of maybe a nice feel-good, message. Everyone has a place in the world to come, beautiful. But that's what we call that one quarter is not called law. It's not called halacha, which we mentioned. It's called agadita, which is actually the next key term in your page 11 if you look at your book. The word agadita is Aramaic, and it literally means retelling or relating. But what it means is when you say agadita, you're referring to the non-legal section of the Talmud, which topics covered include records of historical and contemporary events, homiletic interpretations of biblical texts, and ethical, spiritual, medicinal, and practical teachings and advice. In other words, anything else but Jewish law. It's either called halacha, which is Jewish law, or agadita, which means any other teaching in the Talmud. The teaching of the Talmud is about 1/4, give or take, of the entire Talmud. Those are usually the more fun, exciting teachings, the nice stories in the Talmud. Some of them you start to raise your eyebrow and say, did that really happen? And some of them, they didn't actually happen. They're just trying to teach you a lesson and try to bring out a point. But the idea is they're called agadita. Today, and for most of the course, we're actually going to be focusing on Jewish law, halacha, because that's most of the Talmud. But we are going to touch upon agadita in lesson 4, so stay tuned for that. That's going to be an exciting one. So let's just do this part a little quickly. What kind of laws are mentioned in the Talmud? So if you ask someone, if you ask someone what kind of laws, if you say, hey, I'm studying law, what would you think that they're talking about? Usually you would think the first thing that comes to your head is maybe a law that's talking about preventing harm from someone, maybe a law that is defining societal obligations, such as when do you have to pay taxes and stuff like that, or to regulate social interactions, for example, like traffic laws or something like that, just to kind of keep everyone in check, so to say. But in Judaism, there's actually a lot of other laws that are talked about in the Talmud, and they include a lot of religious laws. So, for example, there are religious laws about how to observe and connect to God. For example, putting on tefillin, mezuzah, having a belief in God. Other laws are behaviors that don't affect others. The behaviors that are connected to between you and God, like forbidden sexual relationships and stuff like that. Other laws are special days on the calendar, like holidays, Yom Kippur, Shabbos. Other laws are prohibitions like called forbidden and non-forbidden, forbidden and allowed things. For example, kosher, or what plants you're allowed to plant, or that you're not allowed to plant certain plants together. Agricultural practices, and lastly, there's a whole bunch of laws on. Lastly, worship. There's worship in the Holy Temple, and then lastly, there's laws about ritual purity and impurity, when something becomes impure and pure. Now, the last two I want to point out are actually not relevant today because we don't have a Beit HaMikdash, we don't have a Holy Temple. So being ritually pure, impure is not really practical today, although it's still in the Talmud and it's still discussed, and you could still study those laws, as well as worship done in the temple. Again, is not something we could do today, but all of those laws are spoken about in the Talmud. So there's a beautiful story told about an emperor who was really fond of his Jewish subjects in his land, and he had a few anti-Semitic advisors who were very upset that the emperor was so nice to the Jewish people. So they tried to persuade him and show that the Jewish people aren't deserving of the respect. So they found a quote in the Talmud, and they showed the emperor, and they said, the Talmud says that when you want to put on your shoes, you got to put on your right shoe first, and then you put on your left shoe, and then you tie your left shoe, and then you tie your right shoe. How ridiculous! That's the craziest, the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. And the emperor looked at them and said, wow, that's the most beautiful thing I heard. Because even when the Jewish people are tying their shoe, they're somehow connecting to God, even at that moment. That's powerful. Now, obviously, to just explain the idea, there's a concept in the mystical teachings of Kabbalah that everything we do, we try to do with our right first, because right represents kindness. So we want kindness to always overpower the other side of discipline and more calculated giving. So we want God to always give us kindly, without maybe looking into our actions as much, because we know we're not perfect. So that's just one of the reasons. But this emperor found that so fascinating. But really, a lot of the Talmud, if you don't have the proper knowledge, then you could misunderstand it, not really understand what's going on. So we're going to answer two questions right now. Number one, we're going to answer, where did the Talmud come from? How did it come to be? The rabbis made it up. They just wrote a bunch of stuff down in a book, slapped it together, called it the Talmud, and how did it come about? The second question we're going to answer is, why is the book of law so important? Who studies law? It sounds so weird. You ever saw someone? I mean, unless you're a lawyer, studying law is very, very interesting, and yet it's like the most incredible book in Judaism. I mean, aside for the written Torah, but it comes in second place. So what's going on? So to understand what the Talmud really is and where it came from and why it's so important, we have to take a step back and understand what the oral law is. What is the oral Torah? Has anyone never heard of the oral Torah? Okay, we got a lot of nodding of their heads. Good, but we're gonna still explain it either way, because you're gonna definitely learn something new. That's for sure. What is the oral law? What is the oral Torah? So, when God gave us the Torah, God gave us two parts of the Torah. There's the written Torah. The written Torah is what's commonly known as the 5 books of Moses. The Bible, the Jewish Bible. The Torah is the scroll that sits in the ark. That's the written Torah. Why is it called the written Torah? Because it's written on a book, on a piece of parchment. That's why it's called the written Torah. And then you have what we call the oral Torah. The oral Torah is the explanation to the Torah. The explanation to the written Torah. When God gave the Torah, he gave it along with an explanation. Moses goes up to the Mount Sinai to get the Torah, and if anyone's ever read the Torah, you'll open up the Torah, you open up the Bible, and you'll read a verse, and it's very much not actionable. Sometimes makes absolutely no sense, and it almost sounds actionable, like you shall tie them as a sign on your hand and as a totafos between your eyes. What are you talking about? I have no idea what you're saying. It's like, it almost sounds like, yeah, you don't know, you don't tie it as a sign on your hand and between your eyes, like it. So that the Torah is actually looked at as almost like the bullet point notes of a lecture. Like I have right here, when I was preparing my class, I put down like my notes for the class. If you read my notes, you would have no clue what this means. After the class, you could read my notes and be like, oh yeah, I remember that, right? So the same is true with the Torah. When you have the Torah, the written Torah is like the bullet point, the lecture notes, and the oral law is the explanation. So Moshe is sitting there learning the Torah from God, and the Torah says, or God says, you gotta bind, take tefillin, and you wrap it on your hand, or as a sign on your hand and as a sign between your eyes. And Moshe says, okay, perfect. A sign in the hands and between your eyes. Next, what else? And that's how really the Torah is that's how it kind of came to be. So to think for a moment that the Torah could have been given without an explanation is almost crazy, because it really doesn't make any sense without an explanation. Moshe coming down from the mountain and telling everyone, hey, I have this most incredible book. It's just bullet points. But there was an explanation that came along with it. That explanation is called the oral law, the oral Torah. And it's called the oral Torah because it was passed down through word of mouth. The teacher told it to their students. Those students became teachers and taught it to their students. And this went on for generations until they eventually had to write it down. And we're gonna talk about more of that in the next week, about how exactly they wrote it down when we talk about the Mishnah. But it's important to understand that when we say the oral law, this is not something that the rabbis the rabbis in the Talmud are not writing down their own wisdom, but the sages are writing down and they're attempting to record the wisdom of God. They're attempting to write down the oral law. That's really what the Talmud is. So the Talmud obviously comes with a lot of significance. Let's look at page 13, text 5. This is the words from Maimonides, the Rambam. He writes as follows. All of the commandments that were given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai and recorded in the 5 books of Moses were presented to Moses along with their detailed explanations that were not recorded in those books, the 5 books of Moses. The Torah itself refers to this in its statement, I will give you the tablets of stone and the Torah and the mitzvah. In this context, the phrase the Torah refers to the written law, that's the Torah we have in the ark, and the phrase the mitzvah refers to the explanation of the mitzvah, of the written law, how to fulfill the mitzvah. God commanded us to fulfill the Torah in accordance with the mitzvah. It is the latter instructions that we refer to as the oral law. So that is the Talmud. Now, why isn't the oral law written in the Torah? Why couldn't they just make a little bit of a bigger Torah and just put everything in? I mean, it would be a pretty big book. But the answer is that it's not possible. There's actually several reasons, but I'll mention 2. Number 1, it's not possible. We'll talk about why in a second. But the second reason is because God wanted us to be a partner in His Torah. If He would have just wrote it down and handed it to us, then we would have no part of it. But because we have to study it and we have to continue to teach it, we become partners with that Torah. Now, to be fair, totally honest, we just mentioned that the oral law was given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai. But that's not entirely true. Not the entire oral law was not given to Moshe at Mount Sinai. There are 3 parts of the oral law. Hold up. There are 3 parts of the oral law. So there's the written Torah. The written Torah is obviously what we just mentioned. But then the first part of the oral law is what we call the received part. The received part is what I just mentioned. God told it to Moses. And God said, this is the explanation. This is what this verse means. That is the first part of the oral law. The second part of the oral law is called the derived part. When God gave Moses the Torah, He gave Moshe 13 principles of 13 rules, if you will, on how to interpret and derive further laws from the Torah. So now, naturally, not every possible law could be written down and discussed because certain things weren't invented yet. So, for example, there's rules about keeping Shabbat. But now, fast forward a few thousand years, and now we have cars, and we have light bulbs, and we have phones. Are those are you allowed to use those on Shabbat or not? And those are questions that have to be asked by future generations. How do you know if you're allowed to or not allowed to? So you have to derive it using those 13 principles, using what we call in today's legal system precedents. You use precedents from other cases about how to decide what the law is in this case. And when it comes to derived laws, yes, there can be arguments on exactly what the interpretation could be and how to interpret it. The third and final type of oral law is called legislated. The Torah gives the rabbis the authority not only to derive the laws, but also to enact and create new laws called decrees or takanot, which are there to enhance and improve Jewish life. So I know you're probably all thinking, like, wouldn't it be great if we just gave an example of a received, a derived law, and a legislative law? That's great. The answer is absolutely. Text number 7, page 15. We're going to take one example of one mitzvah that will see it from the written law as well as the received, how it was received by Moses, and the derived law, how the rabbis derived other laws from that, and number 3, what legislated laws they made regarding that one mitzvah. Text number 7, page 15. There's a verse in the Torah that says as follows: in the first month, on the 14th day of that month, in the evening you shall eat matzot. Make sense? Simple enough, right? On the eve of the 14th, eat matzos. Perfect. Well, not really. The rabbis had a big question. Moshe had a question. Moshe heard this from God. He said, wait, hold up. Question here. God, how much matzah do you have to eat? What is considered eating? Can I eat a crumb? Is that considered eating matzah on the night of Passover? And the answer is, and this is a law that we actually received from Moses, and that is that whenever the Torah says that there is a mitzvah to eat, it means an olive size. Mike, we learned about this, called a kezayis. A kezayis means an olive size portion. Now I want to point out that it's really an olive size in weight, which is about an ounce. And that's because you just kind of imagine, you take the matzah and you grind it up into a matzah meal, and then whatever, you just kind of pack it into an olive size. That's about, and then we usually add a drop just to make sure that we have over an olive size. So it's about an ounce. Also, if you measure an olive, it'd be a little less than an ounce, but we do an ounce just to be sure. But the idea is that that's the minimum amount that's considered eating. So if you have a regular size matzah, it's about half of a matzah, give or take, maybe a little less, depending on how thick the matzah is. But that's the idea. So that's called a received law. We got that from Moshe. There's no arguments about it because that's what we heard. That's what Moshe heard from God, and that's what's been passed down. But as Jewish people were doing this mitzvah of eating matzah, what ended up happening was there were other types of flour which kind of started becoming popular, like rice flour. And they would make cakes out of rice flour or millet flour or whatever other types of things you can make flour out of. And they had a question. Can I make matzah out of rice? What do you guys think?
Gluten-free.
Well, gluten-free.
Gluten-free matzah.
Gluten-free matzah. Is that, you're saying yeah or no?
Well, some people have to eat matzah.
Okay. So you're saying if it's gluten, then?
Well, it's a mitzvah because you're saving a life. Gluten can kill some people.
Okay. So gluten actually doesn't really have to do with this because you can make whatever. Oh, I'll tell you in just a second. What? Gluten isn't wheat. Yeah, but there are other flours. That's really the question. What flours can I make matzah out of? In other words, besides for wheat, and they used to make wheat and barley were the two big ones, main ones. But besides for wheat and barley, can I make matzah out of other things? Let's say the guy's gluten-free and he wants to make matzah out of other flours. Can I do that? Is that considered matzah? Or is that kosher? Yeah, exactly. Is that kosher matzah? That's the question. So that's, what do you guys think? Yeah.
On the box it says not to use for Passover.
Well, it depends which matzah you get. Some matzah you get it could be used for. Are you saying if you get rice flour? So gluten is a different question. I'll get to why, because you could get kosher for Passover gluten-free matzah.
There's a new executive order that gluten doesn't exist.
Okay, we're not doing that here. So the question arose, and this is what they call derived law. There's a verse in the Torah, and we don't have it in the texts, but it basically has the Torah says you should not eat any chametz, and you should eat matzah. And because there's this juxtaposition of not eating chametz and eating matzah, we derive that chametz is the opposite of matzah. Chametz, it means anything that was leavened, that like any flour or grain that could become leavened, that could rise, which is understood to mean wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. Those are flours and grains that could become leavened, which means they could become chametz, which also means those are the flours that you could make matzah out of. As long as you do it before 18 minutes, so it doesn't become leavened bread, otherwise it would be chametz. But the idea is because it says don't eat chametz, eat matzah, we learn that don't eat chametz and eat matzah are very much connected. The matzah is the opposite of chametz. So just to answer your question about gluten, oats, you can make oat matzah, which does not have any gluten in it. Gluten-free matzah made out of oats, which is actually 100% kosher matzah, because oats could become, I guess, fermented and become, kosher for Passover oat matzah. In fact, I actually give it out to people sometimes if I know that they're gluten-free. Well,
anything that could be made into bread.
Yeah.
If it's cooked in under 18 minutes.
Yeah. So, which means that rice matzah is not valid and kosher matzah because rice is not chametz. And if you make matzah out of, any other legumes or beans, it's also not considered matzah because it's also not considered chametz. Make sense?
Not at all.
But if the original thing was that you left with your unleavened bread, but the stuff was all made, but you left before it could be leavened, before it could rise. Why is it,
What do you mean you left?
They left to Egypt.
Oh, you're going back to Egypt, okay.
Well, go back to the Torah study.
So there's actually 2 times the Torah mentions matzah. One is in Egypt, they made matzah. And the second time is the Torah says there's a mitzvah to eat matzah. Nothing to do with, obviously it's in commemoration to the exodus of Egypt, but it's an actual commandment in the Torah that the Jewish people for generations should eat matzah on the night of Passover, and that's right here, Exodus 12:18.
But what I'm saying is that if they had the bread that was supposed to rise, but they had to go before it could rise. So
it baked before they baked in the sun before they had a chance to let it rise, yeah.
But then the dough that they left Egypt with, that dough could have been leavened bread. So it says that they put it. So I'll tell you, they took the dough with them, and it says they put it on their backs and they walked out of Egypt. And because they went right into the desert, it says the sun in the desert baked the matzah on their backs and didn't have a chance to rise. Now, then why are you saying that different kinds of flour? Because their flour would have risen.
Yeah, and that's why it's considered matzah.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. But the basis of it was the same kind of thing as you would have any other.
Exactly.
Any other bread.
Exactly. So that's why anything that could be bread, if you bake it fast enough, it could be matzah.
Yeah.
But if it can't be bread, then it also can never be matzah, regardless of how fast you cook it or bake it. Either way,
I'm sorry.
Let's continue. So the last example is called a legislated law, where the rabbis basically felt that they want to enhance the mitzvah of eating matzah. So one of the things they came about, they said that from now on, every time we eat matzah, we're going to eat the matzah leaning on our left side, so that way we have to go to the chiropractor. The idea is that we want to lean on our left side to mimic the way royal kings and queens would eat. They would eat on these couches and leaning on their side while they eat. So in order to experience the freedom that we're trying to relive at the Passover Seder, there was a legislated law that was passed by our sages to eat the matzah leaning on our left side. And that once the law becomes a law, then it becomes the law, just like any law in America or any other legal system. Once a law is passed, that's the law. And if you go against it, then you broke the law, right? So the same is true. It doesn't matter whether it was a received law, whether it was the derived law, or whether it was a legislated law. A law is a law. It all becomes part of the oral Torah. And if you look on page 15, figure 1.2, you actually have like a chart of everything we just said, all these examples. The written, which says the text, that's like, I guess, looked at as the lecture notes. The received, which is the laws and teachings that we got received straight came from God to Moses, and we got it from Moses to us. Moshe taught those. That's like looked at as like the full lecture. And then there's the derived laws, anything we learn from those laws later on, and legislated are the laws that the rabbis came about later and felt that they could enhance, and they felt necessary to enhance those laws. Now I want to point out that legislated laws go back a long time. Moshe himself legislated a few laws. You know, one of them was reading the Torah on Monday and Thursday. So if you go to any, I guess, synagogue that's established, they have a minyan every single day, they'll read the Torah on Monday morning and on Thursday morning. That law was legislated by Moses. Moshe obviously was a big Torah reader, let's be honest. I think that was his thing. And he felt that we should read it every Monday and Thursday. Monday and Thursday was kind of the days where people got together to do business and marketing. They would head to the big town square and do a lot of marketing. Like they would trade. A lot of trading would go on Mondays and Thursdays. So we felt once you're there, come, let's get together, let's read the Torah. And ever since then, we've been reading the Torah Mondays and Thursdays. King David also legislated a law. The law that King David legislated was that there's a rules of yichud. Yichud means that a man and a woman are not meant to be in a room alone, especially if the woman and the man are married, like not to each other, like separately, you're married to other people. They shouldn't be alone in a room together because of obviously the obvious pitfalls that could happen. What?
Temptations.
Yeah, temptations. Yeah, exactly. So King David said, from now on, we're legislating a law. No, we're not going to hang out in this room alone. And there's other laws. King Shlomo, King Solomon, he legislated the laws of Netilat Yadayim, which means washing of the hands before bread. So those laws, and ever since he made those laws, we do it till today. Those are just some examples. When the temple was destroyed, when the second temple was built, there was a bunch of laws that were legislated. But when the temple was destroyed, there were also a bunch of laws that were legislated specifically because once the Jewish people didn't have a temple anymore, a lot of the services and a lot of Jewish practice was abolished. They couldn't do it anymore. And the rabbis felt that if we don't legislate certain laws, Judaism could fall off the tracks. People could just forget what's going on. You know, if we're just washing our hands and reading the Torah on Monday, people could forget what it's all about. So they legislated other laws. So that's actually in the temple they would pray 3 times a day. I mean, not pray. Well, they do 3 services every day in the temple, and that's one of the reasons why we daven. We pray 3 times a day till today. We do the morning prayer, the afternoon prayer, and the evening prayer because of what happened in the temple that we don't have anymore. So legislated laws were a big part of the Talmud. Now, you're probably like questioning what's this really? What's this oral law have to do with the Talmud? And the answer is that the Talmud is the discussions of how we got to the laws that we have today. In other words, we have a verse in the Torah. What was received from Moshe? What do we derive from those laws? And not only that, how do we derive those laws? And the Talmud records those discussions and really shows their work. You know, like when you're a kid, you have a math test and you have to show your work. You know what I'm talking about? So that's like literally the Talmud we'll go through the whole discussion. Open, it's very transparent. Here's what the verse says. What does it mean? Well, Rabbi Yehoshua says that it means da da da. And Rabbi Yochanan argues, and they'll go back and forth and discuss. And they'll bring proofs from different verses in the Torah to try and prove how their understanding of deriving the certain law would fit more to their understanding. But we have the second. That's really where the Talmud came from. That answers that question. But the last question that we want to answer is, why do we study the Talmud so much? Okay, so I understand it's the analytical discussions on Jewish law, but like since when? Like who studies law? Who does that? You know, like the Super Bowl's coming up, so everyone, even the biggest football fans, have they're in the middle of a play. Something goes wrong. Something happens. And they got to call in their expert. We have Dave from the top office. And he comes in and he starts rattling off the rule book, telling us the laws on how what the ruling on the play is, the ruling on the field. So, but he's really the only guy who studies the law. Even the biggest football fanatics don't study the law. So why are Jews so into studying the law? So into reading? We sit and we read and we study the text from the Talmud. The answer, there's a few answers, but study in general, Jewish education in Judaism is a very, very big part of Judaism. Moses writes in the Torah, Moshe writes in the Torah that he says, teach Torah thoroughly to your children, it's written in the Shema. But I want to let's read text 9, page 18 in your book. And this is a teaching from the Mishnah from Rabbi Shimon HaTzadik. He writes as follows. Shimon the righteous was one of the last surviving figures of the men of the Great Assembly. He used to say, the world stands upon three things: the Torah, the temple service, and acts of loving kindness. These three pillars. Oh, whoops. It's past that. Oh, here we go. The service to God usually refers to prayer. Acts of loving kindness is obviously any type of kind deed. Anytime you give charity, anytime you help out someone else. And lastly, the study of Torah. When we study Torah, the world is being given life because of our study of Torah. So although Jews value any type of education and study and learning, it's really specifically halacha it's specifically Jewish law that became the most valued study of all Jewish texts. And obviously the question is why? What's so special about Jewish law? What is so special about Jewish law that we study it? In fact, it's so important that it actually says we're supposed to study close to 2/3 of our time to studying Jewish law and the Talmud. Let's read text 10, page 20. This is from Maimonides, the Rambam. He writes as follows. One second. Text 10. The time allotted to study should be divided into 3 parts. Now, I want to point out before I continue that the time allotted to study is going to be different for every person. If you're a guy learning in yeshiva or something, then you're gonna have a lot more time. If you're just a mom with a bunch of little kids and you only have maybe a few minutes, then you divide those 20 minutes into 3. So here's what he says: 1/3 should be devoted to the written law. 1/3 is devoted to the oral law. And the last 1/3 should be spent in reflection, deducing conclusions from premises, developing implications of statements, comparing statements, and studying hermeneutical principles by which the Torah is interpreted until one knows the essence of these principles and how to deduce what is permitted and what is forbidden from what one has learned by tradition. The latter topic is called Gemara. In other words, 2/3 of what the Rambam is saying we should study is going to be based on Jewish law, the oral law, which is halacha, the Torah law, and then understanding and analyzing those laws, which is called Gemara, which is very, very interesting. In fact, there's a worldwide movement called Daf Yomi. Anyone ever heard of Daf Yomi? I know, Les, you heard of Daf Yomi, right? So Daf Yomi is a program or system where Jews from around the world will study one page of Talmud every single day. Guess how long it takes to finish the Talmud if you study one page a day? 7.5 years. About 7.5 years to finish the entire Talmud. Takes a while. As we mentioned earlier, it's 2,711 pages approximately. When we say page, we mean a double-sided folio. So one side, two side, a whole page of Talmud. Now, they actually did what we call a siyum hashas. They did a completion of the entire Talmud. They did it about a few years ago, maybe 4 years ago or something. I'm not keeping track. Maybe 2019. What are we in now? Oh, it's closer to 5-6 years ago. Wow. Oh my gosh, time's flying. Either way, so they rented out the MetLife Stadium. How many seats? How many seats are MetLife Stadium? There's a lot. Over 50,000, right?
Yeah, 50-something.
50-something thousand? They rented out, full house, I think. And the whole place was filled with just people who study a page a day of Talmud called Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi literally means a page a day. Daf means a page, Yomi, a day. A page a day. So what is it about the Talmud? What is it about Jewish law that we're running after? We're studying it more and more. So one answer is that Judaism is a religion of action. Judaism is a religion of action. In other words, it's all about what are we meant to do? How are we meant to act? And because of that, we want to know how to act. So the best place to look is Jewish law. Jewish law tells us how to act. Now, although there's other parts of Judaism called, you could study Jewish ideology, Jewish mysticism, and Jewish, teachings and inspiration. But because Judaism is all about the action, we study the Talmud a lot. If you look at text 11, page 21, short quote from the Mishnah, the study is not the principal goal, but rather, what's the principal goal? The action. That's the main thing. So obviously, when we want to study, what are we going to study? Something that will lead to action. That's one possible reason why the Talmud is so studied. We study it so much because we want to know how to properly act. We want to know how to act? Look at the Talmud. Know how to perform the mitzvot. But the truth is, if we're going to be honest, it's not a great answer. I mean, it's a little bit of an answer, but it's not a great answer because the Talmud talks a lot about cases and laws that aren't even applicable today. As we mentioned earlier, there's a bunch of laws about how to do the service in the temple or ritual impurity and purity. They don't even apply today. So why do we study it? And on top of that, if we do want to study the actionable laws, the actions that we need to study, then let's open up a code of Jewish law, which actually says the practical laws that are applicable, and let's study the laws that are applicable to me and you, not some theoretical cases of what if Reuven takes a cow from Shimon. And listen, I don't even own a cow. Why am I studying this stuff? So what's going on? So obviously it's a great answer, but it doesn't fully give us a good picture on why we're studying the Talmud so much. So I want to end off with this one thought on why we study Talmud so much. Why Talmud is so special to Jewish people throughout the ages. Besides for the fact that it's great wisdom and it helped us get 20% of all Nobel Prizes. But what is with the Talmud? Why is it so special? So in order to understand why the Talmud is so special, let's read text 12, page 23. This is from the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi. He was the founder of the Chabad movement, and he was arrested in 1799 by the Russians, and they were interrogating him. They were questioning him about Judaism and Jewish beliefs. They wanted to make sure that his beliefs did not contradict or go against the Russian government. Yeah, exactly. So in the end, they actually, when the Russian government fell, they found these letters in the archives, and they ended up being published in the Alter Rebbe's book called the Igros, which means the letters of the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shnezer. So there's about 22 letters altogether, 22 questions they asked him. But this is just one little piece of one of the letters. Text 12, page 23. That which we refer to in our Russian language as Boga Militia, which means in English divine service. What?
No, sorry.
Boga, I said it right.
I know it.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure you don't go there. Okay. So it means divine service, and it's divided by all of us Jews into two parts. The first is the reading and studying of the scriptures, Talmud, Midrashim, and their commentaries, as well as their study of the legal codes that summarize the laws of the Talmud. The second aspect is the concept of prayer. So just to focus on the words he writes here for a second, he says when we serve God, our service to God as Jews is two parts. There's the study of the Torah, the study of the Talmud, the study of Jewish law, and then there's prayer. So I can understand how prayer is a religious activity. Many religions pray. I think all religions pray. I'm not well versed in other religions, but it's a very, very common thing. There are many religious practices that are very much practiced in other religions. For example, religions pray to God. Religions worship God by offering certain sacrifices. Many religions will engage in certain rituals and have some sort of symbolic meaning. Many religions will be involved in acts of kindness and charity. But Judaism has a religious practice, a practice in which we use as a service to God, a way to connect to God, which I don't think we find a lot in other religions, and that is studying the Torah, studying Jewish law. When we study Jewish law, it's a service to God. It's a service to God. Why? It's like it's a religious worship. So they say a joke about this lady who was she was going to the doctor, and the doctor said, "I just have a few questions for you. Question number one, do you drink?" So she thinks to herself, I drink, like the only time I drink is the kiddush, the wine, on Friday night. So she says to the doctor, "Yeah, I drink religiously." So why is Talmud study, why is Torah study, why is studying Jewish law a religious worship, serving God? Because when a person comprehends an idea, when a person understands something, that idea enters their mind. But it doesn't just enter their mind, the idea also takes hold of their mind. You grasp the idea, but the idea also almost captures you. You can get enveloped within an idea, within a concept. And it really happens when you get into a really, really deep thought and you get, almost consumed by it. Not a lot of things are like that, where you could grasp it, but it grasps you at the same time. And it's really unique with study. So the Talmudic laws, the laws in the Talmud that we're studying, which is the oral Torah, which, as we mentioned earlier, the oral law comes from God. It's the word of God. It's the sages putting down God's wisdom in a book. So when we read that book, we're understanding a concept, a godly concept. We're understanding God's wisdom. So really what's happening, that we're not just grasping an idea, a piece of wisdom that some sage wrote down many years ago. Essentially, we're grasping God, or at least God's wisdom. Let's look at text 13, page 24. This is, again, a quote from the Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi. He writes as follows, text 13. Halacha is God's wisdom and will. For so it arose in God's will that if, for example, Reuven, he's a guy's name, pleads in one way and Shimon in another way, the verdict should be such and such. That's what the halacha says. That's what the Jewish law says. Now, is it possible that this particular litigation never occurred in reality? Nor is it ever destined to be presented for judgment as these precise disputes and claims? Nevertheless, God's will and wisdom has determined that in the event of a person pleading this way and the other litigant pleading that way, the verdict shall be such and such. Accordingly, when we study and understand and properly comprehend with our intellect the details of such a scenario, in accordance with the law presented in the Mishnah, Gemara, or the Poskim, which is the later codes, we have thereby comprehended, grasped, and encompassed with our intellect the will and wisdom of God. We have effectively understood something of the one whom no thought can grasp and whose will and wisdom are beyond understanding, until they are invested within the laws that have been set out for us. So the mystics explain that God is unknowable. You can't know God because God is infinite. Can't understand infinity. We spoke about that more in our Kabbalah course that we did last year. But when someone understands a halacha, when someone understands a Jewish law, even if it's a law that could never occur or never has occurred, obviously also if it did occur and it could occur and if it's practical, but even if it is hypothetical, a hypothetical Reuven and a hypothetical Shimon and a hypothetical case, the law would be hypothetically such and such. They're understanding not just the law, but they're understanding what God thinks in that scenario. You're understanding what would God say in that case. In other words, we're connecting to God in a way and understanding God in a way that you can't do in any other type of worship or practice. So to put it, I guess, in another way, when a person spends 1 hour studying the Torah, what he's really doing is spending 1 hour with God. And that's why Jewish law is so valued throughout the ages and throughout Jewish history. And it continues to be valued. It's why people continue to study it a page a day, a half a page a day, 20 minutes a day, whatever time we have. We study and we discuss the Talmudic logic, because it's not just Talmudic logic, it's God's wisdom, it's godly logic.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So why do we continue to study Talmud even after both temples were destroyed?
I understand. What's the problem with studying Talmud?
I don't understand why certain laws are no longer observed because the temple was destroyed.
Oh, you're saying, why do we study the laws in the Talmud that discuss the temple when we no longer have the temple? They're no longer practical. Why are we studying those laws? That's your question?
Yeah.
So the answer is, as we said, that it's not only about understanding so that we can act upon those laws, we're also understanding God. The better we know God, the better we could connect to God. It becomes this intimate connection with God. Even if it's a moment, even if it's a case or scenario which can never happen, I'm understanding a piece of God. I'm trying to think of an example of some other time where we want to know about someone. I don't know, like I'm thinking if you have like a spouse and you talk to them and you just say like, hey, like if we were millionaires, where would we go? Like, hey, we're not millionaires. Next, like, let's travel the world. It's not practical. What are we talking about this for? Because there's something about knowing the other person that connects you to that person. And the same is true with God. When we study God's wisdom, we're able to connect with God in a deeper way, even though the scenario can't occur today. Obviously, we hope that one day the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt and we will be able to follow those practices again. May it be speedily in our days. But till then, we're studying it as a way to connect to God.
But who said that what the interpretations that people documented in the Talmud are valid today?
Why wouldn't they be valid today? That's like saying they a law that they passed 20 years ago is all of a sudden not valid. Why wouldn't it be valid? Unless you have another court that will, overturn a law, it remains a valid law until otherwise noted.
But why aren't things interpreted and reinterpreted in our time based on our law?
New understanding?
Yeah.
So it's a good question. The answer is that once a Jewish court, and I actually skipped that text in here, but if you want, you can read it. I'll just find it real quick. There's the Torah says, the Torah has a verse in the Torah. Text 6 on page 14 in your book. It says there that whenever there's a matter of dispute, you go to the court. That's what the Torah says. That's not a derived law. That's not a received law. That's not a legislated law. That's straight up in the written Torah. When you have a question, you're not sure what to do about Jewish law, you go to a Jewish court of rabbis who have studied the entire Torah. They know the entire oral law. They know the entire written law, and they're able to make a decision based on that. And they make a ruling. That ruling has to be adhered to, as it's written here. You can read it. You can read the verses. But the idea is that once that law is enacted, it becomes a law, just like any other law. No one's going to say, "Hey, I think that we should take out tefillin. We're not doing tefillin anymore because tefillin is a law, and that's it. It remains a law." So when they understand that eating matzah on the night of Passover has to be with either right wheat, barley, oat, spelt, or rye, that becomes the law forever. Now, the only time that you could change a Jewish law, which is very rare, but the only time you could change a Jewish law is if you have a court of rabbis who are greater in number, in other words, more rabbis, but also greater in wisdom than the rabbis who made that law to begin with. I'm not sure what the American legal system, if you want to change the law, I'm not sure how it works. What? So that's why I said it's very rare. It never happens. It never happens mostly because no one feels that the rabbis in the Talmud are less smart than we are today. We feel that everyone feels that the generation before them was a little smarter. But let's just say, for example, some guys got up. Let's say, I don't know, some of us in the room, me and you guys, we said, hey, you know what? We're making a rule. You got to eat a Laffy Taffy a day, whatever. And we made some crazy law. Technically, let's say we're the smartest rabbis in the entire generation. There's no one else smarter than us. But then comes a few years later, and people actually start to study, and they say, okay, that was a ridiculous law. That clearly doesn't make any sense. Everyone knows that they weren't smart rabbis. Then they could abolish or change that law, and it has happened, but it's very rare. Most of the time, and we'll actually talk about this a little bit in the next class and the class after that. That the generation that was closer to the giving of the Torah is assumed to be closer to the truth, because you have to remember, naturally, although we believe that the Torah was passed down authentically and fully throughout all the generations, you can imagine that there's some things that we may not understand as well as the generations go on. So everyone looks at the previous generation, especially if they were learned and rabbis who studied day and night, that they knew what they were talking about. So there's no reason to change a law based on just the fact that we feel today that it should be different.
But yet there are still laws that we don't have today because there's no longer a...
Yeah, because we can't. Not because we don't want to, or because we abolish them. We just can't do it. There's still mitzvahs, there's still laws, we just can't do it. That's like saying, there's traffic laws, but if there's no roads, are there still traffic laws? I mean, they're still there. And the moment we have a road again, we'll continue the same traffic laws that we observed when there were roads. But I just want to mention one more point, and that is that the Alter Rebbe actually writes that the sages that lived before the Shach and the Taz, which are the two commentaries on the side of the Code of Jewish Law, the sages that lived before them, everything that they wrote down was written down with what we call Ruach HaKodesh, which means they wrote it down with a spirit of holiness. In other words, I can't call it a prophecy because there was no actual prophecy that they had, but when they wrote down their words, they were writing down words that God almost inspired within them. So,
There's no temple today, but there's laws regarding the temple system.
Yeah.
What to do in the temple. So when the temple is rebuilt, hopefully soon, we have those laws on the books on how to practice and what to do in the temple.
Yeah.
But those laws aren't going to change because we're in the 21st century. The same laws from 2,000 years ago, right?
You think they won't change or they will change?
If the laws have been on the books for thousands of years, it's not going to change because we rebuilt the temple.
I mean, the truth is, let's be honest. I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but when we rebuild the temple, it says that there's going to be Techiyas HaMesim, which means all of the people who passed away will come back to life.
Right.
Which means we'll have the same rabbis who made those laws, and they'll be able to look around and be like, "Hey, we have cars these days. We could move around."
They're going to enforce their laws.
They could change it. I don't know. I'm just hypothetical. I don't know what's going to happen when Mashiach comes, but anything could happen. But let me just finish off so you guys could go, or we could ask some more questions. But in the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk more about the Mishnah and the Gemara and how exactly these discussions took place. We're going to even take some samples of these discussions, get into them, understand the Talmudic logic, the famous Talmudic logic, and try to get into it a little bit. But I want you to be just aware of the idea that sometimes you could ask yourself, okay, like Roseanne said, just tell me the bottom line. Why do I need to read the whole discussion? Why do you need to tell me, oh, this rabbi said that, and that rabbi said, and then he tried to prove himself, and then he was disproven, and that verse and this verse, and just what's the practical bottom line? What do I got to do? And it's important to remember that we're not just studying laws so we know what to do. We're studying God's wisdom. We're studying what would God think in such and such a case. And that's powerful in and of itself. Regardless of whether the law is practical, it's the wisdom of God. This is the way God thinks. You learn the Torah and you could think the way God thinks. I think that's powerful in itself. So next week, we're going to continue this amazing course with the discussion of the Mishnah. And we're going to talk about how the Mishnah was put together. We're going to talk about the structure of the Mishnah, as well as the spiritual value of the words of the Mishnah's, the words that the Mishnah contain, the actual text of the Mishnah.